I'm Alex Gomez. Welcome to the Blues Slide Guitar Workshop. Today we have a very special guest. It's South Florida bluesman Dave Morgan, who is also a collector and dealer in rare National Resophonic guitars, which are an extremely misunderstood instrument. We're going to clear up a lot of the controversy surrounding this instrument, and also Dave's going to demonstrate how they're played and a little bit of the history about them today. But first, let me finish up this tune that I'm working on, which is kind of a cross between some Robert Johnson stuff and also some stuff that Blind Willie Johnson used to play. Now, we're in open G tuning, which is familiar to us by now. We started some of the earlier shows with this, and this is D here on your 6th string, G on your 5th string, D on your 4th string, G on your 3rd string, your 2nd string is tuned to B, and your high string here is tuned to D. Well, the tune that I just played is sort of a composite of a couple of different players' styles. One that I mentioned is Robert Johnson, and we've been getting a lot of calls here on the show about the Robert Johnson style, and I would especially like to focus in on a tune by Robert Johnson called Crossroads, and at least go over the intro with you, because this is something that people have been requesting, that they'd like to know what he's doing there and his approach to it. Well, Robert Johnson, as we discussed on earlier shows, was a specialist in taking different styles of his era, which was around the late 20s to the early 30s, and incorporating them into his own style and sort of reinventing the blues for that era. Now, the beginning of Crossroads contains many of these components. The first is this, which is sliding up on the 2nd and 1st strings to the 12th fret, and then you slide up individually on the 2nd to the 12th fret, 2nd string, 12th fret, and then when you get to the 12th fret, you sound the 1st string at the 12th fret, and then you sound the open 5th string. So it's a real dramatic contrast there, and that's one thing that Robert Johnson specialized in, was contrasting, for example, a low note with high notes, a soft sound with a loud sound. He would use dynamics in order to keep the listeners interested in the pieces that he played, and also to make his songs seem larger than they really were. The sum was greater than its parts. And that's basically what we're doing here, is putting together parts of a tune. So we have the first part here. Now this part is sliding up on that 2nd string to the 12th fret again. And when you get to the 12th fret, you slide down on the 3rd string, like this. And when you get down here, you slide up on that 3rd string to the blue note that we've talked about before, which is located between the 3rd and the 4th frets on the 3rd string. Then you do a pull-off to sound your open 3rd string. And then finally you sound the 5th fret 1st string. Now, what Robert Johnson would do is he would do a percussive brushstroke before he sounded that note. This is something that we talked about on last week's show with Mike Locke, where he would, before he played a riff, he would scrape across some notes and hit one note. Okay, this is the same effect. Robert Johnson would brush across all the strings and hit only this note here. And the way you do that is you brush with the thumb and pluck with your finger here, or if you have a pick, you can pluck with a pick. And here's how it sounds. Okay, you see that has a different sort of sound than just hitting the note itself, okay? Now, Johnson would do a percussive slap here to complete that phrase after going. He would just hit the strings like that, and muffle them, and then go. Now this part here we discussed before when we talked about turnarounds. This is the turnaround that Johnson would use very often, and what he's doing here is he's fretting at the 3rd fret on the 6th and the 4th strings using the middle finger and the ring finger. And I'm using my thumb and index finger to pluck those 2 strings. And I'm just walking it down what we call chromatically, which is fret to fret, down to the open position. So we're going 3rd, 2nd, 1st, open position. Meanwhile, on this open G string, I'm using my middle finger of the plucking hand to do this, to pluck that string, this kind of sound. Now this is what we talked about once, which was blues time versus straight time. Now this is blues time, which is a triplet feel, which is instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, we go 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, etc. So you've got this effect. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the entire phrase would go like this. And finally, Johnson slides up on the 3rd fret of the 5th string. And then he sounds the open 4th string. And finally, the 6th string. That's the entire intro. So let's do the intro together slowly. 2, 3, go. And there you have it, the intro to Crossroads. Today we have a very special guest, as I mentioned before, Dave Morgan, who is not only a collector of guitars, but also an excellent bluesman in his own way. And we're going to be talking about a style of instrument that was made popular in the 20s and 30s. And this particular instrument utilized a device called a resonator. And this is what it was. And I know it looks sort of like a flying saucer, but this device was responsible for making instruments a lot louder than they normally were, and also ushered in a whole era of blues styles. Now let's listen to Son House playing one of these resophonic instruments from a tune he does called Death Letter Blues.
You got a letter this morning, I ring it red. You say, hurry, hurry, the gal you love is dead. Got a letter this morning, yeah, I ring it red. You say, hurry, hurry, 'cause that gal you love is dead. Grabbed up the suitcase, took her down the road. When I got there, she's man on a cooling boat. I grabbed up a suitcase, and I took out down the road. I said when I got there, she's man on a cooling boat.
Well, that was some archival footage of Eddie Son House, who was a player that influenced Robert Johnson in the Mississippi Delta era. That was around the early 20s, late 30s, that sort of era. The most significant part of what Eddie House was doing there in that performance, we're talking about today with Dave Morgan, is the resophonic instrument that he was playing. And it's more than just a chrome-plated guitar. We talked about this device earlier, which kind of looks like a flying saucer or something. This is also an active component that gives it the sound that you heard there, which you hear on a lot of your old Mississippi Delta blues records. And Dave, could you just sort of explain how these parts work and the mechanics of the instrument?
Yeah, in the late 20s, one of the problems that they were having with bands was that the guitar really, although it was a rhythm instrument, couldn't be heard over a lot of other instruments in the band.
Right.
The banjo at that time was a very loud instrument, and the mandolin. And some brothers who emigrated from Czechoslovakia, the Dopera brothers, had worked on a invention of amplifying the guitar and making it louder than a conventional guitar. And this actually looks like an inverted pie pan, but it's a piece of spun aluminum. And this sits in the center of the guitar, where pretty much where a regular guitar bridge would sit. The strings push down on this little piece, which is called a biscuit or a bridge, and the pressure causes the aluminum to vibrate. And with the sound chamber inside the guitar, it gives it extraordinarily loud response.
So which one was Eddie House playing in the video of these guitars that you brought today?
He was probably playing one very similar to either this model here, the Duolian, or the Duolian model that's over on the end. His had a slightly different paint job on it. But this is what they call a single cone resonator National. A lot of people confuse National guitars with Dobro guitars.
Right.
And although both instruments were made pretty much by the same people, the Dobro does not use a resonator like this. It uses one that actually looks inverted, and it has a series of spider legs pushing down on it to produce the sound. 90% of your Dobro guitars are in a wood body, although they did make a few metal, and 90% of your Nationals are metal, but they didn't.
Now, there's a controversy about the Dobro versus the National brand names,
Right.
and there were some brothers that started the company.
In 1926, the brothers, the doPERRA brothers, actually founded the National Stringed Instrument Company, which produced the first National guitars. And then about a year later, they got some investors. One gentleman was George Beecham, who later was instrumental in the Rickenbacker guitars and some other ones. But then they had a falling out, and there was some financial problems, so the brothers founded their company in the late 20s, and it was the doPERRA brothers, which they shortened to Dobro, which gave you the Dobro.
So what happened to National then?
National then, 2 years later, merged with Dobro and became the National Dobro Company, and they produced both instruments at that time. But the litigations and stories about National, like Bob Brosman has a book coming out, there's going to be a lot of backyard stories to tell about it.
So besides being a South Florida blues man, you're also a vintage guitar dealer and collector.
Right.
These examples that you brought today, are these all Nationals from the second company that you talked about?
These are, actually, no, we've got some of this particular instrument right here. I'll grab this one. This is what we call a stamped headstock National. In other words, the name up here doesn't have a decal.
Right.
This is an example of one of their first instruments. This was a cheap instrument called the Duolian.
How cheap was it back then?
This, I think, cost $32. Wow. The paint's kind of worn off on the front, but if I can turn it on the back, you can see it had kind of like a green,
sort of like an
crinkle finish. It was a Duco, a little crinkle finish on it.
Right.
This body is made out of steel, which is another little interesting piece of trivia. This is where the term steel guitar actually came from.
Right.
The pedal steel guitars that the country players played originally evolved from these.
Now, also at the time, these were not used for blues as much as they were for popular styles.
Yeah, the National was more like an orchestra guitar that people came out with that you could hear a little bit better. But you got to remember, in the late 20s, Hawaiian guitar was very vogue, very big. And most of the people were playing Martins or Gibsons that had been converted to Hawaiian. And when the National guitars and the Dobros came out, they seized on the louder volume, and immediately that became the instrument of choice.
You know, there's some blues historians that even claim that there's a direct link between the Hawaiian musicians that toured around the United States and the blues men picking up that style.
I believe there probably is, because the Hawaiians used a lot of the slat key tuning, like Saul Hoopy and some of the other guys, and they would use knives and later on pieces of glass or metal. And I feel there's a correlation between the two, because a lot of them used open tuning, which happened with the Nationals. But when these instruments first came out, the round neck instrument, such as this tricone, you see the neck is round on the back, was the exception. The majority of these instruments had a big square neck, and they were laid on their lap, and you'll see the pictures of the old people playing.
That was a really popular style. In fact, there were schools that taught that style.
Hawaiian guitar, absolutely. And
now, this is different than the ones that you showed us before. This has more...
Right. This is a very, very rare model, and this particular model right here is called a tricone, whereas the other ones use one large round resonator. This has a series of 3 small cones inside that are pushed down on to give it the volume.
And there's a vented screen there. Does the sound mostly come out of there, or would it come out of these holes there?
Actually, it comes out of this chamber right here, and a little comes out here. Now, one thing about these guitars, everybody assumes they're all made out of the same thing. This particular guitar is called a silver guitar because it's made out of German nickel silver, solid.
Does that actually have silver in it, though?
Yes, it does. A little bit of silver content. The little Duolian is a steel-bodied guitar.
So play us some riffs, and let's see how this thing sounds.
Well, let me grab my pick. Now, this I have tuned up for normal guitar playing. You play regular style guitar or traditional.
Now, this has a sound that's kind of like a reverb chamber in it, too.
And this particular one is going to sound a little bit different, let's say, than one of the round
For example,
Resonators.
which, like this one?
Single
Let's
resonator,
just compare them.
Okay.
I'll play this one here. Now let's put this in perspective. Now this one you said retailed for about $30-some.
Right.
In the when, like 1920?
Late 20s, early 30s.
And this one was like a Cadillac of the...
Well, now this is a
flag.
Style 1, which means this has no engraving. You could get this model all the way up to a Style 4, which some of these have very ornate engraving on.
Right.
I think this one probably sold at that time for $79 or $89.
Okay, now we know that there was a Dire Straits album cover that featured this particular instrument here.
Yeah, let me grab
which
that.
Significantly contributed to these guitars escalating in value. So.
Yeah, they had been picking up for a long time with Johnny Winter.
Right.
This is the famous scene that most of the people are used to seeing on their cover, which is the palm trees, the little guy in the boat, and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
That's the very famous. And on the front of the guitar, you see that it has the palm trees going up
that
around
is etched
the side.
in there, or is
This is sandblasted.
Sandblasted, wow.
And this is called a Style O. This is probably one of the most sought after. This particular model is very rare because if you'll notice on the cover plate, the design of the holes are like a poinsettia, whereas on the other guitars there,
like this, just some vents with holes in it.
Right.
And these are, now the tooling required to make these type of instruments, I can just imagine right now how much that would cost. But just to, like I said, put this in perspective, what do these instruments, just a ballpark, retail for now at a trade show?
You mean to buy an original one?
One like that we're playing right now.
Thousands of dollars. It depends.
Right.
Tricones like this, round neck tricone guitars, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, depending on the model.
And as a vintage dealer, in your experience, does the price fluctuate or does it keep steadily
These have been steadily going up. You can still buy, some of these for a few thousand if you find them, or a few hundred, actually. It's just that normally you don't find these instruments anymore because there was only a few of them made back then, and to have survived 60 or 70 years without being heavily destroyed,
right.
you run into a lot of problems.
Also, I'd like to point out that, besides being collector's items because they look nice and everything else like that, they also sound great. Let's give a demonstration of another reason why they're collector's item. What you might call the intrinsic value of these things is because they sound great, just like the Eddie Sunhouse too.
Yeah.
So I'm in open G here.
Okay, well...
Actually, this is an E,
You're
right?
an E. Well, we can play in key of G. Is that cool for you?
Okay, fine. That's great.
Like a little... to get a regular guitar to sound like that. It really is hard to get. They do have reproductions of these instruments. There's some good ones out. It's just you find a real one, hang on to it.
Well, the reproductions are kind of pricey. They retail in the $1,500 to $2,000 range.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you really are serious about getting an instrument that has this sound and of this type, the type of individual that sells these things, you have shows, right?
They have vintage guitar shows, but I'll tell you, most of the guitars that I've found, I deal with collectors, but I still go to flea markets and garage sales, and it's the kind of thing where they're out there. There's a few of them out there. I'm not saying that every time you want to buy a National Instrument, you have to spend mega bucks. I've been fortunate. This guitar came from the Thunderbird Flea Market in Fort Lauderdale for all of you people out there, so they are
This is the legendary flower pot guitar?
No, the flower pot guitar, that's another story. The lady was selling one of these guitars without the cone. It was laying on the ground filled with dirt and flowers, and she was selling flowers. I bought the flower pot for about $5, and it ended up being a National. But I want to point out one guitar real quick that's really kind of an interesting piece. When I talked about the engraving, I want to make sure I don't get a glare off of this. Let me see if I can get the back where it's not going to glare for you.
And it's a fine Art Deco design.
Yeah, these were very, very, very deco instruments. You can see all the fine engraving on this instrument. And on the sides of the instrument, some kind of tough. There's some beautiful. But I don't know if this will show up or not. Let me get away. But on the cover plate, right there, is the name Don. And when we first found a couple of these instruments, we thought maybe some fella back in the Midwest had engraved his name Don. There you go. You can see it. Actually, this is a very rare national model called the Don.
Why is it called that?
They used to use a lot of Spanish names back then, and the Don being the top of the line. Yeah. We talked about the engraving allowing the instruments to have different model numbers. This is a style 3, which is the most ornate of this with the little diamond inlays. These are virtually priceless. They didn't make a lot of them.
Also, the headstock has some
the headstock has what this is. Well, this is what we fondly refer to as mother of toilet seat. You can see the celluloid there. It's not pearl, but it's meant to emulate pearl. But this instrument belongs to a good friend of mine, Tim Rivers, who's a fine guitarist and a collector of nationals, and he was kind enough to let me bring the...
What is this made out of? I know you said this is a German silver.
Right.
Here.
This guitar, as is the Style O, is made out of bell brass, the real stuff they used to make bells out of.
Right.
And then it's plated over the bell brass.
So it has that musical quality versus...
Very bright sound.
Now, what is this made out of, for example?
The Duolians, like the one you're holding, those are made out of steel, galvanized steel.
Okay, now this is... The reason I asked you about the flower pot is because this is... That would have been a restoration when you put it back together. That's what this is, sort of, isn't it?
That guitar right there is all original. There's a gentleman, a friend of mine named Bob Peterson, has a company called Angel Guitars, and he has worked on pretty much all of these instruments in one way or another just to get them back to originality. I don't like to change authenticity of these instruments, but let's face it, if something's wrong with it, you want to get it fixed, and he's the finest I've ever seen when it comes to doing that work. But that one he resprayed for someone. They just wanted to cover some of the original paint.
Now, is this an attempt to simulate an original finish?
Well, I'll show you one more thing here real quick, although this is one of my favorites here, this little 1928 Duolian. This is mine. You can see how it's been through the war and started to rust, but on the back, you can kind of see what the original color was.
Right.
It's kind of an Art Deco crinkle gray finish right there. It's got a little wear in the center, but they ranged anywhere from a light color like this to a very dark green like that. There was a lot of variations, but the steel body.
They all have different sounds. So let's just compare that. This is the same material.
This is virtually the same instrument, except this one was made in the late 20s, doesn't have the decal emblem. The fingerboard on this is bound, has a nice pearloid binding. This has a plain side. The name is merely stamped into the wood. And this was one of the first instruments they made right here, was this Duolian right here.
But this is, from a collector's standpoint, more valuable because the name is stamped.
Well, yeah. If you wanted to get into that part of it, this would be a little bit more sought after because it's an older. Stevie Ray Vaughan, I forget the name of the album where he's sitting with the cape and the hat. If you look at the album again and look at the headstock of the guitar, and you'll see that it's a stamped headstock Duolian. Yeah, but this puppy, I use this 5 nights a week playing, and I just wish the original owner could see where it's ended up because it's still being used.
So
which is kind
the type of playing that you do with this, is it all slide playing, or are you doing some other?
Everything. I love these guitars for everything. I play with my upright bass player friend Frankie Rosati, and we'll do everything from your Jimmy Reed or your Son House to T-Bone Walker, straight, because I have a pickup on that.
And you're using these instruments to do that with, right? Or do you use an electric too?
Well, sometimes I use my big box electric, but I use the National for a lot of stuff. It's a very versatile instrument.
So what kind of reaction are you getting from the audiences when you play that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Terrific, yeah. Because, you know, a lot of people hear the older blues records, or like the Nottingham Hillbillies with Mark Knopfler and all of his friends, and they hear this sound, but they're not quite sure what's creating it. So when they hear it...
Well, let's do a little bit of that. Let's hear some of this sound. We have a special guest with us today who's Mike Locke from the Night Stalkers.
My buddy.
And if we can bring him into the studio...
Sounds good to me.
We'll demonstrate. Okay, we can use one of these
Michael, we'll let Mike have this tricone here, and I'll play this little Duolian, and you can play...
Let's see, I'll play the Felix Special, I guess.
Yeah, see if Felix is tuned up there. Felix has been...
Okay.
Now, you may want to grab that Duolian right there.
All right, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll have to find a good key to play in because...
now, this guy walking in is a guitar player.
That's right. And we have Michael Locke with us in the studio today of the Night Stalkers.
Hey, buddy.
And you go ahead and have a seat here.
I'll just do this.
All right, that's good. You've seen that pose before. You just have a seat there.
We could do like a little slow blues in G or something like that.
Sounds good. We'll make it sound good.
Okay.
Play Slide Guitar by Alex Gomez is the easy way to get started playing this exciting guitar style. Expert instruction means our proven step-by-step learning method will have you playing slide in no time. How to Play Slide Guitar by Alex Gomez is not just for beginners. It's a great way to jumpstart your playing if you already play slide guitar. Get How to Play Slide Guitar by Alex Gomez today for $29.95, which includes shipping and handling. Order by MasterCard, Visa, American Express, or check by calling 1-800-688-8508.
This is what they really mean by heavy metal.
That's right.